Okay guys, so welcome. So let's call this GraphEditor 101, all right? Okay, so this is an old example that I used to talk about a while back, and it's been something that you guys would even find in the Animator Survival Guide. The idea of talking about timing and spacing. You're going, wait, I thought this was going to be about the GraphEditor. Well, that is in essence what the GraphEditor is used to control, is your timing and your spacing, which is the speed of how your character or your actions are moving. So that's where we're going to start. Clarifying the idea of timing and spacing, seeing what it looks like in the GraphEditor and how we control it, okay? So if I look at what we have set up here, and the old idea here was you took a penny and you said it takes the penny it takes it 1 second to go from point A to point B, and that's what, 24 frames is 1 second worth of animation. So that means that the penny arrives basically at 25. It takes 24 of those frames to click away to get there, which is a second in time. So that's the idea of timing, is it's a set amount of time at 24 frames, at the rate of 24 frames a second, for something to go from whatever point to whatever point, okay? The spacing obviously is when you set up the actual distance traveled. The spacing is actual distance traveled, right? Yeah, and whenever you're talking about spacing, you're just talking about that, how far you've moved something or changed something or rotated something, whatever value change you're working with, okay? In this case, it's translates left and right and translate X, okay? So what you'll see here is the top penny moves from 0, which is translate Y, translate X at the value of 0, as you can see in the channel box here, right? And it's all based on what? Maya world space, right? So on the grid here, as far as in Maya world space, or even out here in perspective, the grid, the origin's right there, everything relates to that. This is 0 in translate X, okay? That's where our penny is starting, and it's starting at the frame of number 1, right? So it takes 24 frames to get to where it's headed, right? And that is a value of 10 grid units in translate X to the right. In this case, too, to the right, it's a positive direction. It's a positive 10, not a negative 10. Your move tool always points to a positive direction. That's why it's pointing to the right here. That's moving in a positive direction. That's why we head camera right. Okay, so it takes 24 frames to move 10 grid units. If I actually select the penny below it, that has the same timing, right? Translate X is at 10 and at frame 25, and when I click back to 1, it's at translate 0 at frame 1. So they have the same exact timing, and even if I grab the guy on the bottom, he's got, let's get me a little more out of the way here, there you go. He again has the same value at the same time, 0 at frame 1, and 25 at frame 10 at frame 25, okay? But when I hit play, they all move differently, okay? That's the spacing of the in-betweens creating that, right? Okay, so as I scrub through, you can see that right out of the gate, the top penny takes off first because it's moving the greatest difference as far as spacing. So it's going to move faster, right? The one below it doesn't move as much because you can see the gap is much closer here if I come in close here, right? And you can see the frames being kind of clicked out here as far as the distance traveled. Each one, as we go down the selection here, is moving a less distance in one frame, okay? The one on top has even spacing, meaning every time frame ticks away, it moves the same exact distance. If you have even spacing, ticking away at a constant rate of 24 frames a second, you have basically something that moves with no deceleration or acceleration. It moves at a constant rate. The one below it, as you guys know, there's slow outs and slow ins. This one is creating a slow out, meaning it's gradually slowing out and getting faster, okay? So slow out is coming out of something, where you come out slow and you then ramp up to faster, and you can see the spacing changing as it opens up to make this penny move faster, okay? And the same thing, we have a much more extreme version of that below, with very tight spacing, frame by frame, and then we finally take off, and look at that big gap open up in the middle, and that's why it's so fast to zip through the middle, okay? So the use of timing and spacing, you guys should be familiar with that. You've got to cement that in your head. It's just the understanding of this is how you control the speed of your animation, which is crucial to something having weight and believability in its performance, okay? Well, one of the many things that's crucial. Now, what does that have to do with the graph editor? Okay, well, I select my good old penny and I look at the graph editor, and as you guys know, keys are keys, right? Curves are curves. The keys are going to look the same. If I select these two guys here, you're going to see those two keys are stacked on top of each other where they start. The difference is the shape of the curve, and the shape of the curve is what's creating our in-betweens, right? Well, at least the spacing on our in-betweens. Now, how does Maya do that? Well, again, the more I select here, again, everybody is on the same keys, same values, timing and spacing, okay? So let's take a look. I have a little visual here I'd like to open up. Hit play, and let's see how this goes. Let's see if I'm in my way here. I should have moved my face out of the way. Let's move me down here, and we'll come back to our keynote. Bam, and we're back. Okay. So overall, on some of the, even the ideas here that you need to keep in mind, right, is in the graph editor, timing, much like your timeline, goes left and right. Let's get a different color here. Left to right, yeah. Timing goes to the right, basically, though, right? And that's the way it ticks away. Value or spacing is up and down on the grid, because this is a grid that we're working in right here, right? That's the graph editor in its grid fashion. We are measuring timing versus spacing, which is controlling the speed of your animation, okay? You guys obviously know that your black dots are your keys in the graph editor. You know that the curve is called either a tangent, a curve, or a spline. Any one of those will do. That's what's creating your in-betweens, which we'll take a look at in a second. Connected to your key is the tangent handle, which allows you to change the shape of your curve, which is what we're trying to understand about how those in-betweens are being created, the spacing is. You guys know about the use of breaking your tangents and unifying your tangents, actually, which is really helpful when things are trying to accelerate at times, which you need to do in your bouncing ball. Obviously, the stat boxes here are going to tell you your timing and your spacing on your actual key that you have selected. All right. So that kind of gets us up to speed, and a little bit on that. Oh, in and out tangent, okay? Like I was saying, if you're creating a slow out, you always want to look at your key, and then the curve coming out would be called an out tangent. And that makes you understand whether your action is moving fast out of that key or slow out of that key. If you understand the pitch of that key, you understand whether you're slowing out, coming out fast, or coming out even, or whatever it is. The in tangent is the curve that comes into the key, and that allows you, in this case, to have a slow in, or maybe to come in fast, or whatever it is. And understanding, again, controlling the speed of your actions is what this is all about. All right, let's get out of that and let's move on. So let's take a look at what we were looking at just before with the pennies. Okay, so we have our two keys set up, right? And this is the one that gave us even spacing. Even spacing has this very straight linear line, as it's called. Okay, so what Maya does, again, thinking about timing and spacing, Maya doesn't matter if there's not a key on every frame. Maya still cares about every frame, because when you key something, it attaches the curve to it, right? And that's creating values. So whether there's a key there or not, Maya can actually check the points that are being created in the curve like this, right? So each frame, it's going to basically evaluate what value should be on that curve if it was keyed completely like this on every frame. And if we look at the spacing that creates here, what you're going to see is this is the one that was moving the same distance each time with even movement. That's what linear does. You're going to see, like, look at that key. It moves up in value or space the same distance every frame. So the same distance of movement is the same value of movement. That means, again, something moves the same distance every frame at 24 frames a second. It moves at a very constant rate. Okay, that's why you get even spacing for a linear line, or a linear curve in this case. Okay, now we take those same two keys, same position, same value, same time. We change the shape of the curve. Maya, once again, is going to calculate the values that's being created by the curve, and when we map it out this way, when we look at the up and down changes, which is the value or movement changement, we're going to see that it starts off very tight and it doesn't move a lot. So again, that's not a lot of value change in the graph editor. That's not a lot of physical movement in the scene, and that's why we get our slow out as our key starts to go up, right? Or as our value starts to go up here. And again, we're reading left to right because that's the way we tick away in time. And then we open up and we get faster in the middle, and then we get tighter, 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 and we slow in as we come into this top key here. Okay? So that is our slow out and our slow in. When things go flatter, they're not moving a lot in space, and that's not a lot of value change. So we don't have we have a slower movement, okay? And the more gradual the changes, the smoother the movement, okay? Now if we take that other extreme down there, and this is not exactly the same, but it's close, it gives us, again, Maya maps out the changes. Whether you have extra keys or whatever, it's all about the value change in time, right? So in this case, I'm using more keys to shape the curve differently in order to control the speed change. And here you can see that, again, not a lot of value change all the way up until about frame, it seems. Was that 12 and going on 13, and then we turn around, we have a big gaps in the middle, so we're really moving fast when we get to those frames around 15 or so. Oh, actually no, around 17 or so, okay? And then once again, we're going to slow in a bit, and we're going to stick, and we're going to stay there for a while and have a very tight slow in, a very slow in there, okay? So let's look at this stuff kind of in action here. Okay, so let's look at that. First off, step settings. Some of you guys don't know what step settings are. I suggest you watch the video on play blasting and step settings, and I can go over that there. But just knowing what we've learned right now, this represents step settings where you don't have a shape of a curve here. If you look at the actual curve, what are we seeing here? We're seeing a key here and a key here. This represents my starting point. This represents my end point, and then it's gonna come back to my starting point, so it's looping. Because the curve isn't a curve, it stays flat. Guess what? It's staying at the same value, which is 0, and it's still 0 here until it hits this key. That's why it pops. That's why step settings allow you just to preview the keys you've created if you don't want to see your motion, and sometimes you don't. That's called a pose test, okay? So step settings don't give you any motion, right? Let's go back to that linear. Oh no, this is a slow in and slow out. And again, we can see what's going on here. Again, understanding a slow out, which happens here. It's slowing out from here. We come out flat, so we come out softer, right? And then here, this represents, again, this key here. I'm slowing in and I'm slowing out. So that's the slow in and the slow out. So each time I come in or out of a key, I am coming out slow. That's why it's nice and soft, and it's a little bit faster in the middle. More vertical in the middle, flatter in and out of the keys, right? So rule of thumb, think like a caveman. Vertical is fast, horizontal is slow, okay? Let's look at that linear now, okay? So linear, here you see no change in the curve. Again, whenever anything stays this way, you can just rely that anything set to linear is going to give you the same distance traveled for every frame. So you never change speed, and that's why it feels like it hits a little harder, because it's not slowing in and it's not slowing out in either key. So it bounces out a little bit more. Okay, obviously we can break this more and come out even faster and out, and that's your bounce, and we'll see that in a bit. Okay. Here's something. Again, just recognizing this stuff is you know, if you can turn around and say, I'm coming fast out of this key because it comes pretty vertical, right? And then I slow in. And I kind of get really slow here, right? And then what? I kick out nice and fast there, and that's that burst coming out of there, is that down. Bang, and I kick out of there, and then slow in, and then guess what? I kick out again when I come back this way. Boom. So understanding this visually is what you guys need to be doing, because that will allow you to utilize the graph editor when you're trying to control the speed of how something is moving. And it's very black and white if you understand it. Once again, here I know, without even looking up here, I can just sit there and go, this comes out really slow, and then it accelerates and blasts in really fast, and then it's going to stick as soon as it hits. As soon as it touches this wall, it sticks, because it doesn't go anywhere, and then it has a slow out again, and guess what? We come in really fast again, and guess what? We stick again. All right? That's kind of called shark finning or reverse shark finning. You get that quick change, right? That contrast. Let's see what we got next. Oops. Well, what is this one called? We'll just make it up. That's a fast out. That's a slow in. That's a slow out. And there's a fast in. So we're going to get a bounce coming in and out of this key. Boom. And you can see that. Fast out, fast in, and fast out. Ba-doom. And then here is this key representing this key. And this is the slow in side where things are just coming in flat and going out flat. The opposite is happening over here, and we get more of a bounce, right? Ba-doom. And more of a slow in and slow out. Okay. And here's your typical bounce on the side, right? There's your bounce, which is this key, and there's your bounce. Boom. Coming in and coming out fast, slowing in and slowing out. On this side, once again, we're coming in flat, we're coming out flat, so there's our slow in and our slow out. This is a little variation of everything, right? If you were to kind of try and say this has a slight slow out and it comes in, and this is pretty linear, so it comes in kind of even though it's faster than it was before, so you have a gradual slow out into something coming in even, and then something sticking again and slowing out and coming in really fast, and then slowing out again, okay? And then here is our wildcard coming up next. This is what overshooting looks like to an extreme in your graph editor. And by overshooting, we mean that you have your keys that we've been working with, right? But if you turn around and you bend these tangent handles, and some of you have done this, right? A tangent handle will have to do this, you know, and this to create this curves like this. You can, if you create peaks with the curve, well, every time you change direction up or down in your actual direction up and down in the graph editor, you're changing direction in your motion, okay? Because negative and positive, right? Positive goes up, negative goes down. That's your ball going left or right. And every time we change direction, your ball changes direction. Never really that good of an idea to animate this way. That's why you create keys when you want to change direction. If you wanted this kind of action in your scene, you should be keying those extremes. That's what keys are, right? They create the most extreme points. And then too, you have more control over when you change the timing and move them left and right where those peaks are. And also you even have control on whether they come out fast or whether they come out slow, because you have a tangent handle attached to that, okay? All right, so when we look at the idea of progression, oops, we're gonna chug a little here. Hopefully we'll come back. Boom, there we go. Okay, so when you guys hear the idea of progression just means, hey, how is this thing moving? Is it moving, like I've been talking about, is it moving fast to slow, slow to fast? Is it moving smoothly, erratically, changing timing? I mean, changing direction, okay? If you wanted, say, this torus just to go up nice and slow out maybe, and then come a little bit faster in the middle and slow in, that's not the progression you should see in the graph editor. The idea of the graph editor is you might build something and it might be a little clunky, and in the graph editor you actually take those keys, and just by, as you can see here, me taking the actual keys and saying, oh, I should have done this first, let's get me out of there again, oops, and I'll come back. Yeah, I'm good. I can draw here. Just by looking at this, I can see that my key goes slightly down. So this is my torus going slightly down before, then it goes up kind of fast, right? The more vertical here. Then it's going to stick and actually go back slightly down again because it drops a little bit. Then it'll go faster up again. Then it's going to stick completely. There's no value change in here. I can see that because the line is not pixelated, so it's the same value. And then I'm going to come up and slow in. Okay, so if I wanted this to be smooth, it's not smooth. It reverses, it comes up, it sticks and reverses again, it comes up and it sticks, and then it keeps going. So when I hit play here, I have to go back now. There we go. When I hit play here, you can see that I can manually go in there, and instead of rekeying and repositioning it manually, I can just take those keys and say, hey, I want you to go slightly forward, then I want you to go up, and then I want you to keep going up there. And I can just clean this up just to make sure that it just goes from a more slower position to a faster position, then slows back in. Then I can even get in closer and refine this even more to make my slow ins a little bit more predominant and make it a little bit faster in the middle. And that's the idea of progression, is going in there and evaluating very black and white how your changes are happening. And this is all attribute by attribute, control by control, controlling your character to a very high level. Anybody who wants to be an animator, this is your workflow you're looking to incorporate into building. This is actually even a great idea here, as I just continue now to just say, hey, why don't I just animate this thing by moving the keys, or even deleting some keys or whatever, or changing some curves to say, okay, now it goes up in the middle and it comes back down, and up, down. So now it's doing twice as much up and down. But just putting some keys on a piece of geometry and animating it, adding keys, deleting keys, changing the tangents and understanding what it does to your action. You can see me just moving it and seeing what it does to the in-betweens, moving the timing, crafting something different. hitting play and getting your mind and your eye to connect to what's going on in the graph editor, how you're controlling it, and what it's doing in the viewport to your actual action. Okay? So that's my advice to you guys. Again, nobody can really teach you the graph editor. We can just try and point it out what it's set up to do, and if you really want to be comfortable using it and be able to use it, which is your goal, you need to spend time playing around with it. So start with something simple. Actually, that's the whole basic idea of the Bob rig. Okay. Okay, another look at some idea of progression here is this is 2 channels. So here I have the torus, and it's going to actually go left to right again, but it's actually going to skid, and it's going to be using rotate. So it's got to rotate, I believe, Z in it, and it's got to translate X again, going left to right. So if I hit play, you're going to see it kind of skid to a halt as it rears back and then rotates forward and skids. Okay, so there are 2 channels, and what I do here is I isolate, and that's the wonderful thing about the graph editor. It's going to isolate. You can isolate channels, and you should look at it that way, where you only look at one attribute at a time. So here I've stopped the rotate. I've muted the rotate by going in the channel box there and right clicking. Okay, and you can just see now only the translates are working. So if I look at the curve that's creating my left and right translates, I can understand very clearly what I'm trying to do to create this skid just by bringing it left to right. And there's my slow out, and then it's going to kick a little bit, kick quite a bit. Actually, I could have cleaned that up, right? And it's actually going to slow down a little and go kind of even. It comes in very even. That's a linear line, right? And then you're going to see within like 1 frame, 27 to 28, it's going to stop almost on a dime. And it's going to pop forward, go backwards, pop forward, go backwards, pop forward, and then slow in. Okay? When you hit play, we see that pop, you know? And that's what's controlling the translates. Now, if we mute the translate and just turn around and unmute the rotates, so reverse them, now I'm only going to see the rotate, what the rotate's doing. And there it is. There's my rearing back and dipping forward to stop. Okay? And again, looking at that curve and the progression of the keys is there me slowly rocking back and rocking back more. All right? Up in this case is rocking backwards, and then I'm going to start to dip a little forward, and I'm going to really dip. I broke the actual tangent to come down much faster and dip to put those brakes on. Okay? And that's controlling that action. I unmute that channel, put them both together, and I have the translates and the rotates creating the action there of the skid. Okay? So divide and conquer is the name of the game. The graph editor is really great at getting you to think more and more like this, which is really the standard basic idea of any kind of workflow that you're kind of working with. Okay? So let me get out of that, and we'll kill this. Okay, just a few other things to kind of point out. As you guys know, your F key will frame up everything in the graph editor. Okay, let's even open up this guy. The one thing that students usually forget to do is hold down Shift and Option and right click. And when you do that, you can push up and down or scroll up and down and scale it how you're viewing it, you know, in a vertical manner. Or you can do the same thing, Shift, Option, right click, and you can go left and right and scale the timing or the horizontal. Okay, vertical, horizontal, along with moving this thing just by holding down Option and middle clicking and zooming in everything together, which is just Option, right click. So Shift, Option gives you that extra control so you can get in here close enough to see this. Okay. As far as to some of your options, you guys know that you're using step tangents here. If you watch the video, you'll see me point those out. When I hit step tangent, it's going to basically get rid of the curve, and you're going to see it hold down the value this way and then pop to that key here. If I hit the auto tangent, that usually is going to give me something that kind of tries to stay soft, coming in and out of the keys. In this case, let's even go to here and see what happened when I hit 2. When you hit something called, the next one over here, and it's called spline. Spline is usually kind of a hard one to use because, as you'll see here, what it's doing to me here is it's giving me an overshoot. Spline tries to keep everything very smooth. We ask you guys probably not to use this. There's the time to use it, but ultimately be aware that if you set things to spline, it's going to take this tangent handle and it's going to want to smooth it all out, which is going to create overshoots. And what that does, it will look at the penny. It goes backwards in a negative direction before it goes forwards now. So again, spline is really meant to try and keep things very smooth, even if they suffer by changing the directions. Okay, so spline is usually not your best way to go. Either really is clamped. Clamped can give you some similar. As you can see, I'll go back to auto tangent. It'll flatten out so I don't go in reverse. Right, and then if I hit clamped, it's still going to give me the overshoot here too. Clamp tries to do similar stuff as spline, but it doesn't work as well too. It gives you a lot of things like this that you really, if you want to control your rig, you have to go hunt down and fix. Okay, and when you talk about a character that has many controls and many channels, you're going to have a lot of overshoots to track down. Linear is right there in the middle, and that's going to give you just straight lines, which obviously is even spacing, but it's also pretty mechanical movement, right? So be aware of that. Your flat tangent, what that'll do is it always will give you a flat handle. And what that does is, if you want to slow in and slow out of something, set it to flat tangent, because that will slow you in and out no matter what you do. And a lot of times you don't want to. That's like your character coming in and out of a key and pausing and then continuing on. If you wanted that, great. Set your keys to flat tangents. Auto tangent is going to give you mostly your best results as far as keeping things fairly smooth. So flat, tangent. The other last one is called plateau. Plateau will give you actually some pretty decent results at times, but it'll also give you some what we call plateaus. And as you can see here, this gives me a slow out, and it gives me a slow in here before I go, as opposed to maybe auto tangent, which is going to keep that moving fairly smooth through the key. Okay, so really, auto tangent is your best bet to start off with, to set your whole scene to, unless you want to pose test and take your in-betweens out and stepped. Everything else, sometimes you need a flat tangent, you can apply that. Sometimes you need a linear tangent, you can apply that, or whatever. Sometimes you're manually adjusting stuff, but really you want to go back and forth between these two depending on where you are in your scene. Okay. Alright guys, so hopefully that helps and gets you started, and I will see you next time. Okay, bye-bye. Let's find it. There we go. Ba-doop.